December 17th, 1944. The frozen soil of the Ardennes groaned beneath the boots of the Wehrmacht as they advanced through the mist. The air bit like iron, sharp enough to cut the lungs, and each exhale from the captured American soldiers rose in faint, ghostly plumes against the pale Belgian dawn. German officers stood among them, silent, watchful, surveying their prize from the morning's chaos. Scattered across the frost lay rifles, helmets, and something unexpected. Small, rectangular boxes, neatly stacked, stamped with unfamiliar letters. K-Rations. At first, the officers only frowned. Then one of them, Oberfuhrer Klaus Dietrich, picked one up, shook it gently, and allowed himself a thin, contemptuous smile. At 42, Dietrich had long since lost the naive thrill of conquest. 3 years of unrelenting war had carved the youth from his face, leaving behind the lean endurance of a man who had outlived both optimism and hunger. His fingers, pale and cracked from the cold, turned the box over as the faint rattle inside broke the stillness. "Field rations," he muttered, "from an army that's never starved a day in its life." Around him, laughter followed, dry, hollow, echoing through the pine trees like brittle branches snapping in winter wind. The men had been raised on stories that Americans were soft, that their soldiers were factory boys and farmers dressed up to play at war. The neat packaging only seemed to confirm it. Too polished, too bright, too civilian. Dietrich lifted the lid with the air of a man unwrapping a gift he didn't believe he wanted. "Pretty boxes for pretty soldiers," he sneered to Kruger, his aide, who grinned despite the frost gathering on his eyelashes. The officers chuckled again, but beneath the laughter lay something else. A flicker of curiosity, perhaps even unease. For what they held in their hands was not merely a soldier's meal. It was a symbol, a quiet, metallic whisper of a far greater truth. These K-rations were not simply food, they were the taste of industrial supremacy. Designed by physiologist Ansel Keys, each compact box delivered 3,000 precise calories. A portable promise that any soldier, anywhere in the world, could eat like the homeland itself was beside him. Inside, every package was more than nourishment. It was America's faith in its machines, in its factories, in the endless rhythm of its assembly lines. Canned meat, processed cheese, chocolate bars, cigarettes, coffee crystals, chewing gum. The inventory of comfort, sealed in waxed cardboard. To the German eye, it was almost absurd. To the Allied soldier, it was lifeblood. And as those Wehrmacht officers examined the alien contents, the silence between them grew heavier. Because in those humble boxes lay the proof of a staggering divide, the chasm between German efficiency and American abundance. The Wehrmacht's logistics had been forged for blitzkrieg, for wars of lightning, for conquests that fed themselves on captured lands. Theirs was a doctrine of movement, of speed and scarcity turned to advantage. But America's system was different. It was built for distance, for time, for the unthinkable idea of sustaining millions of men across oceans and continents. Detroit, Chicago, Pittsburgh. These cities had become invisible arsenals of sustenance, producing not only weapons, but the calories to keep those weapons wielded. German soldiers prided themselves on endurance, on eiserne Ration, iron rations that spoke of toughness and will. 300 grams of canned meat, a crust of hard bread. That was the daily reality by late 1944. The assumption, once practical, was that soldiers would forage, supplementing their meager rations with whatever they found along the way. Bread from occupied bakeries, potatoes from frozen fields. But the front had stretched too far, the land too barren, and the illusion of self-sufficiency, had withered under the relentless pressure of total war. By then, the difference in sustenance was staggering. When supplies were good, German soldiers consumed around 2,500 calories per day. When not, far less. Their American counterparts received between 3,600 and 4,500 calories daily, fortified by an unbroken chain of logistics that reached from Midwestern factories to the foxholes of Europe. One side fought with discipline, the other with plenty. And in war, plenty had begun to prove its own form of power. Dietrich tore open the K-Ration Box. His fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the dull ache of months spent hungry. Inside, he found small miracles that mocked the austerity of his world. A can of meat, real beef, not the fatty, gristly paste the Germans called Fleischkonserve. Crackers that didn't chip teeth. A bar of chocolate so rich he could smell it through the wrapping. Cigarettes, coffee, the simple luxuries of civilization, preserved and shipped into chaos. Kruger lifted one item, his voice low with disbelief. They send candy to the front lines. His words drifted in the cold air, while our men make coffee from acorns. The others said nothing. The laughter was gone now. In its place, a silence heavy with realization. These were not the rations of a weak army. They were the signs of an enemy so secure in its power that it could afford to make war feel almost comfortable. The forest itself seemed to listen. Wind moved through the pines like breath, and the sound of distant artillery became a muffled heartbeat in the snow. Dietrich stared down at the box in his hand, its neat design mocking the hunger that had defined his men's lives. The truth was impossible to ignore. This was a different philosophy of war entirely. The Americans believed that a soldier who ate well, who rested warm, who felt human, would fight longer, harder, better. Germany had believed that hunger forged resolve. America had proven that comfort forged endurance. When Dietrich bit into the processed cheese, it was like biting into another world. Salty, smooth, real. The taste of fat and warmth and home. Things he hadn't known in months. Kruger tried a chocolate bar, and for a brief moment his eyes closed. Around them, the others followed, cautiously tasting their captor's bounty. The transformation was subtle but visible. Mockery turned to curiosity, then to something quieter, a dawning respect, or perhaps despair. Because what they were eating wasn't just food. It was proof of a nation that had mastered the art of distance. America could feed men 6,000 miles from home as easily as it fed them in New York or Kansas. Every K-ration was a testament to the marriage of science and steel, to conveyor belts that never stopped, to engines that hummed through the night, to the belief that logistics could win wars. The Wehrmacht had underestimated the invisible weapon that powered the Allied advance. Factories, assembly lines, supply chains that stretched like arteries across oceans. Each K-ration box was a small, edible symbol of that machine, efficient, tireless, unstoppable. By 1944, America's Quartermaster Corps had produced over 105 million of them, enough to feed not only their own soldiers, but also their allies across the world. Meanwhile, Germany's food production had fallen by nearly 30%. Even the farms could no longer keep up with the hunger of a nation, at war on too many fronts. Dietrich ate slowly. Each bite was mechanical at first, an act of defiance. But as the warmth spread through him, defiance turned to something else. He realized that this taste, this abundance, came not from chance, but from a system Germany could never match. Industrial power had replaced the sword and the rifle as the true engine of victory. He finished the last cracker, brushing the crumbs from his gloves, and for a long while he simply stood there, listening. The forest was still. Only the faint whisper of wind through branches remained. Somewhere far off, the muffled thud of artillery rolled across the snow, a low, distant drumbeat from a world already beginning to shift. And in that cold clearing, amid the quiet of winter and the scent of pine and iron, Oberfuhrer Klaus Dietrich finally understood what every K-ration truly meant. It was more than food. It was foresight. It was faith in a machine that could outlast hunger, outlast distance, outlast war itself. A gust of wind passed through the trees then, soft, carrying with it the faint rustle of paper as another empty K-ration box tumbled gently across the snow and came to rest against his boot. The processed meat provided proteins that had been increasingly rare in German rations. The chocolate delivered sugars and fats his malnourished system craved with a quiet urgency. Even the instant coffee, dissolving cleanly in hot water instead of leaving the bitter dregs of ersatz substitutes, felt like a small miracle, a warmth that spread from the hands to the chest and settled there for a moment like a remembered hearth. "How many of these do you think they produce?" Kruger asked at last, voice lowered, turning the empty K-ration box over and over in his hands, tracing the crisp printing, the measured typography, the careful seams, a throwaway object, designed with an elegance meant to be tossed aside after a single use. The question didn't so much land as hang in the frigid air, white breath rising around it like smoke. How many, indeed? The truthful answer, millions upon millions, rolling off production lines with a clockwork indifference that dwarfed Germany's entire food distribution system, lay beyond their imagination, and the implications pressed down like snowfall, quiet, steady, relentless. If the Americans could afford to package individual meals with this kind of care and abundance, what did that say about their total productive power? If chocolate and real coffee rode forward in the same crates as ammunition, what did that mean for the workers in Detroit or Chicago? What did their lunches look like, their dinners, their pay packets, their confidence? And if soldiers ate this well at the tip of the spear, what, then, were they pouring into their tanks, their aircraft, their artillery? The K-rations were not just food. They were a form of intelligence, a paper-wrapped report from an economy so vast and so calmly productive that it treated as routine what Germany could manage only through exhausting, extraordinary effort. Word of those American boxes, of the salty meat, the smooth cheese, the sweetness that melted like a vanished memory, spread through German formations with a speed faster than any courier. Men subsisting on thin bread, ersatz coffee, and whatever could be scrounged from emptied villages or frozen fields, found themselves confronted by a fact more stubborn than doctrine. The enemy was not merely better equipped. In many places, he was better fed than German civilians. The psychological impact was immediate and deep. Every soldier knows the old line, armies march on their stomachs. But what did it mean to face an army whose stomachs were filled with chocolate and real coffee, whose daily calories arrived sealed in waxed cartons that opened like a promise? Winter sharpened the contrast. Supply lines sagged under distance and cold. Partisan strikes nicked and tore at the roots like hard thorns. Trucks arrived late or not at all. Men grew used to the hollow ache that never quite went away, the slow drift of weakness as bodies quietly burned their own reserves just to keep pace with the daylight. They learned the art of stretching a scrap of meat across an entire squad, of coaxing flavor from potato peels, of accepting in silence the kind of nourishment that peacetime would have sent to a barnyard. Meanwhile, American units kept receiving not merely enough, but variety, K-rations in the press of combat, other field rations for sustained operations, and whenever the tactical picture allowed, hot meals from field kitchens that could raise bread and soup out of mud and weather, even, on good days, fresh meat hissing against a pan. It was a solution to the oldest ache in warfare: how to maintain fighting strength over distance and time without stripping the land bare or tethering the army to fragile lifelines. The answer lay in American industry, yes, but also in American fields, agriculture scaled and mechanized, yields per acre rising with modern methods and machines, abundance that could be measured, packaged, and shipped. The same revolution that forged tanks and aircraft turned as well to food, to preservation, to packaging that kept calories intact from continent to continent. When German intelligence finally began to inventory captured provisions with the same focus they applied to enemy order of battle, the details read like a quiet verdict. The date stamps revealed production schedules that hinted at factories running in vast, synchronized rhythms. The ingredients lists spoke of access: real coffee, true chocolate, processed meats, items that had grown rare even for German celebrations. Most unsettling of all were the signs of casual waste: partially eaten rations tossed aside, components left unused, a kind of indifference possible only to those who live with surplus. To men who saved bread crusts and counted biscuits, that waste was not just galling, it was a message. By January 1945, as the Battle of the Bulge slowed toward its hard conclusion, officers like Dietrich did the arithmetic no one wanted to do. Their soldiers were weakening, calorie by calorie, day by day, while the enemy appeared to hold steady, a line of strength fed by ships, trains, and trucks, by warehouses whose roofs they would never see. The K-Rations had become more than sustenance. They were symbols of a paired capacity, industrial and agricultural, that Germany could not match, no matter how carefully it measured, no matter how ruthlessly it optimized what little remained. The final understanding did not arrive as a theatrical revelation. It accumulated the way snow piles up on a branch, flake after flake, until the weight suddenly matters. Captured American wounded often looked healthier than uninjured German soldiers. Discarded gear bore the marks of plenty, tools thrown away rather than repaired within an inch of their lives, equipment abandoned instead of coaxed into a second or third existence, supplies destroyed to deny them to the enemy, a choice only abundance allows. Each detail suggested the same thing: a military power backed by production so lavish that an individual item, a single box, even a crate, ceased to have real meaning. In his report to Higher Command, dated February 3, 1945, Dietrich wrote a line that now feels almost prophesy. The enemy's strength lies not only in numbers or in the quality of their arms, but in a seamless system of abundance that we cannot meet on its own terms. He added with the candor of a tired professional that American soldiers ate better in foxholes than German officers ate in garrison, and that this was not decadence, but a new kind of strength, one for which traditional efficiencies had no adequate answer. The K-Ration, in the end, revealed power in its most elementary expression: the ability to feed an army so consistently that chocolate and coffee were not luxuries, but routine. Those who began by mocking the boxes ended by understanding they pointed to something without precedent: a modern army that truly never starved, supported by a homeland organized to produce abundance as steadily as breath. The war itself would continue 3 more months after Dietrich set down his conclusions, but in another sense, that counted. In morale and expectation, the result had been decided earlier, out there in the white hush of the Ardennes, where German officers tasted a different doctrine and understood its implications. For in that clearing, they met not just better calories, but a better grasp of how wars are truly won, not only by discipline or tactical brilliance, though those matter, but by logistics, unyielding, unglamorous, decisive, and by a production capacity that turns intention into tonnage and tonnage into staying power. In quiet hours before surrender, as German formations pulled back across a landscape they could no longer hold, many officers found their minds returning not to flags or speeches, but to the small square of American chocolate, softening against the tongue, dissolving at the edge of memory. It seemed trivial, almost embarrassing, yet it had opened a door to a truth too large to shut. They had been engaged not simply with an army, but with a civilization wired for abundance rather than scarcity, for measured efficiency rather than improvisation born of desperation, for industrial confidence rather than tradition, cherished as a substitute for capacity. The K-Ration boxes, now empty, now crushed, scattered on roadsides and in hedgerows from the Ardennes across the wider war, had delivered their last lesson. America did not prevail solely through courage or tactical innovation, though both would always deserve their due. It prevailed because it solved the modern equation of war, how to project not just force, but food, not just numbers, but nourishment, across oceans and seasons for as long as needed. In that calculus, logistics were not support for battle. They were battle, waged in factories and fields, with a steadiness that matched any front line. And so the men who once smirked at the bright little packages came to see that they had been mocking an omen, ridiculing without knowing it, the shape of their own defeat, tidily packed, neatly labeled, and carried forward on a tide of production that hummed like a faraway engine you could hear if you held your breath and listened to the low, unending thrum.